Chapter 20. In his room, Ben packed his gym shoes and trunks into a blue zippered bag that had the Marine Corps seal stamped in white on the outside. From his top drawer, he pulled 2 pairs of sweat socks, rounded into uneven balls, stepped back toward the door, and lofted both pair of socks toward the open bag. He made one shot miss the other, but retrieved the missed shot quickly, gave a head fake, pretended to dribble, went up with 2 defenders on him, and dunked the socks into the bag, then adjusted the zipper. "It's over for you today, hotshot," Marianne said, standing in the doorway. "What do you mean?" Ben asked. "First basketball practice. You become the golden boy today, loved by all, adored by every creep in the world. After a couple of games, I'll become known as Ben Meacham's sister. But the saddest thing of all, the really sad thing, Ben, is that there's some poor guy who's waking up this morning who thinks he's going to be first string, has planned on it for a whole year, and who doesn't even know that you're alive." "I've got to make the team first," Ben replied. "False modesty is your worst fault, big brother. You've got to learn to enjoy bragging. I love to brag. I just don't have anything to brag about." At school that day, Ben's mind wandered far from his studies and the voices of teachers. Marianne was right. Ben knew that the exile was almost over, that his term of loneliness would be shortened the first time he touched the ball in practice. Since the beginning of school, his every waking hour was directed toward that moment. In new schools, redemption came from his ability to go around anyone with a basketball. But he always worried about that first essential step, the making of the team. He worried most about his shooting, that his touch would desert him, that his fingers would stiffen, and that the coach's eye would fix on him every time he missed a shot. He had nightmares that he would take 10, 20, or 30 jump shots in the first practice and not make a single one of them. He also feared the stupidity of coaches, especially high school coaches in the Deep South, who usually regarded basketball as a bastard weak-kneed son who whined and piddled away the dark season between football and baseball. Anything could happen during a first practice. Tryouts were a time of fear for any boy. Ben had awakened that morning while it was still dark, with the butterflies, the old invisible protozoa of fear that invaded the stomach on the days of contests or of testing. In the morning dark, he had thought of what might go wrong, of why he might not make the team. The thought of being cut made him physically sick, and the butterflies moved within him with the burning wings of nausea. But no matter how he tried, he could not think of a reason why he should not make the team. For the past 8 years, on every day that it was possible, he had shot 100 jump shots a day, made 100 layups, and attempted 100 foul shots. He had once dribbled a basketball left-handed to and from school for an entire year, because he had heard Bob Cousy say that a great guard must be able to dribble well with either hand. But the biggest reason he thought he would make the team was geographical. Ravenel, South Carolina was so far removed from the proving grounds of American basketball that it seemed impossible to Ben that excellence could be found among the homegrown boys. His main concern was that some Marine kid from California or D.C. had slipped in and, like him, was biding his time until the first practice. Ben had received his training on the outdoor courts near Washington, D.C., when his father had been stationed at the Pentagon. For 3 years, from 6th to 8th grade, Ben would go to the courts adjacent to the Center Theater in Alexandria, Virginia, to learn their fundamentals from boys much older and stronger than he. For 2 years, he was humiliated, teased, and taunted as he tried to shoot over taller boys, pass through crowds of arms, or defend against athletes who considered it a gift to let Ben guard them. But he earned respect because he returned to the courts every day, no matter how severely he had been humiliated the day before. Eventually, he became a kind of mascot, and the bigger boys liked him in the way they always liked the smallest and the youngest member of their group. It was on this court that Ben learned he could dribble, that he was quick, and that he could beat others because he loved to hustle. He learned to fake and pass, to set picks, and to lead a fast break. In his 3-year apprenticeship, he learned the game. As he improved, he was called the Weasel by the other boys, and by 8th grade he was selected to play in the full-court Saturday morning games that were violent, often bloody affairs where he was accepted by the high school boys because he could handle the ball well. No one played defense on the courts. Defense was a kind of approximation. Everyone just tried to hurt the guy they were guarding once in a while to let him know they were around. Ben had seen 2 boys carried off the courts on Saturday morning with concussions. That was defense. Ben knew when he woke up on this morning that no one in Ravenel, South Carolina had been spawned on such a training ground. For on the courts of Alexandria and Arlington, as on most of the courts of the D.C. area, most of the players were black, and the swift, passionate laws Ben had learned in those years were more valuable than the tutoring he had received from any coach, even his father. And Ben knew that south of Alexandria, Virginia, white boys didn't learn anything from black boys. That afternoon, Coach Otis Spinks gathered all the tryouts already in the center of the bleachers. The returnees from the previous year, already assured of a place on the team, shot layups as they glanced arrogantly toward the boys in the bleachers, sizing up the group as a whole. There was hatred in their appraisal. "Good luck, rookies," one boy called out, invoking a laugh from his teammates. Ben saw that the boy was Jim Don Cooper, the linebacker and captain of the football team, and the boy who had gone steady for 3 years with Ansley Matthews. Coach Spinks stared at a clipboard while he sucked on a half-empty bottle of RC Cola. He had heard the players discussing Coach Spinks' addiction to this particular soft drink. It was claimed that he consumed 3 six-packs of RC daily, flavored with 2 packs of Lucky Strikes. His stomach was enormous, an incongruous attachment to an otherwise finely proportioned body. As the coach called names from his list of tryouts, Ben looked around and studied faces as only as his. Odd, he thought, I've never seen any of these boys, yet I must have passed them in the halls dozens of times. It gave him a feeling of camaraderie with those outcasts who had come to the gymnasium hoping to find their identity and feed on the secret bread of glory that had been denied them, who had felt isolated and banished from the main flow of student life for so long. Each boy seemed to be saying, I have a name, and a face, and a laugh, and a cry. Can you see me? Can you hear me? Ben also noticed that almost every boy quivered with excitement, hands trembled, feet tapped out nervous tattoos. The bleachers were filled up with new basketball shoes. The shoes seemed blindingly, tragically white, as fresh as wet paint. The smell of shoes lifted straight from their boxes filled Ben's nostrils. A sadness gripped him as he realized how many pairs of new shoes were bought for nothing. The bleachers in this moment were ruled by virgin shoes and wool socks fresh from cellophane. The bleachers swarmed with youth, unanchored, unpraised, and convulsed with the dreams of gangly boys and fat boys who wanted to be a part of something with a desperation that was almost palpable and alive. Then Ben listened to Coach Spinks' introductory speech. I'm a football coach, boys. Y'all should know that. I never have gotten too much to basketball because, to tell you the truth, I thought it was a game invented for the boys who were too chicken to play football. It always kind of embarrasses me to see boys running around in their underwear, flashing their armpits. I don't really know all that much about this game, but I've read a couple of books and talked to a couple of old ball players. It seems to me that this here is a simple game. Coach Spinks pointed to a young blond boy in the front row and said, Do you like to put it in a hole, son? The varsity laughed behind him as they continued to shoot layups. Pardon me, sir? The boy asked, terribly flustered. Do you like to put it in a hole? I love to put mine in a hole, the coach said, winking at the other boys in the stands and turning toward the returnees who grinned at the old joke. Well, that's the name of this game. The team that can put a basketball in that hole most often always wins these games. As y'all know, I got me some stud horses coming back from last year's team, so it's going to be real tough for you boys to make the team. I don't mean to discourage you now, but with 7 players back from last year's team, that means only 3 of you has a chance to get a uniform. Now, I'll give y'all a good look over, and if you can put it in the hole or pull leather off the wood, then I can always use another stud in the stable. Looking around, I don't see many tall boys in the crowd except for Mumford there, he said, pointing with his RC bottle at a skinny blond boy who sat in the same row as Ben. The boy reddened at the mention of his name. All eyes in the gym turned on him. And I know he can't rebound since I cut him for 2 years running now. Laughter resounded through the gym as Mumford rested his arms on his prominent knees and stared hard at the laces of his new shoes. Now, the first thing we're going to do after warm-ups is to see how well you boys stack up against the varsity. If you can't play with them boys out there, then you're going to have a mighty rough time against some of our opponents this year. We've got 10 games scheduled with teams from the Charleston area this year, and that's nothing but city basketball up there. Get out there on the other end of the court for layups. When I call you, line up in 2 lines at center court. We're going to play 2-on-2 for a while to see if you can put the ball in the hole. Now get your butts down there for layups. The whole crowd of boys rose and thundered off the bleachers, white shoes shining and voices raised in a high-pitched grass beneath... It's missing a page, so I don't know. Grass beneath his cleats and pads on his shoulders. His shot, however, was surprisingly dainty and soft. He could not leap, but he would gather in many rebounds because of his girth. In shorts and rubber-soled shoes, he looked vulnerable and misplaced, like a Cro-Magnon man lost in the centuries. Art the Fart Ballard was unquestionably the best rebounder on the team. He was squirrely and skinny to the point of emaciation, but he could come close to dunking the ball during warm-ups and had the great spring that one comes to associate with tall, skinny boys. He had a poor, uninspired shot and was a terrible dribbler, but Art the Fart could jump higher than boys 6 inches taller than he. Ben had heard him called nothing but Art the Fart since he had arrived at Calhoun High School. It was an extension of the name that seemed natural. Sammy said Art had been called that since first grade, so he had had plenty of time to grow accustomed to his nickname. Ben made a mental note never to name a son Art or Bart. The only boy that Ben knew personally was Philip Turner. Philip was the student council president and had the chiseled, immaculate Anglican features of that aristocratic breed. He sat in front of Ben in Mr. Loring's English class. They had talked several times, but Ben was not important enough for them to become friends, or for Philip to engage Ben in a truly serious conversation. At all times, Philip was impeccably groomed, his shock of rich brown hair combed neatly, his demeanor serious and forthright. He walked around school with a sense of urgency, as if Khrushchev were calling him collect from Moscow, or he, Philip Turner, had to make a decision that afternoon whether to recognize Red China or not. Teachers loved him without reservation, which made it a law for students to hate and envy him. Though he laughed a lot, it seemed more like good social training than the enjoyment of a good joke. He did things in earnest only if he thought it would help him later on. He played basketball because he thought it would help him win a prestigious scholarship to an Ivy League college. Always he was thinking about the future, about events that would occur 2, 4, or 10 years hence. Teachers were always looking at him and saying to each other, "There goes the future governor of South Carolina." Philip would sometimes hear them blush, but silently agree. Philip's father was a man of little formal education, who had become a powerful social force in Ravenel. After 20 years of hard work and ruthless manipulation of small farmers, Marshall Turner had become the emperor of truck farming in one of the most fertile agricultural areas of the state. Though Mr. Turner had dirt under his fingernails, and though he could never look like anybody but a man who had seen a lot of cucumbers in his life, he had trained his wife to train his sons to be gentlemen. Philip was the youngest, the most princely, and the one furthest removed from his father. As a basketball player, Ben noticed that Philip was mostly form. His jump shot looked good, but he rarely made the shot. Philip would go up, his legs would come together beautifully, the arm and wrist motion was pure, but something was not there. The shot differed in small ways each time he left his feet. Several times, Ben saw Philip look down at his feet when he was shooting. Philip was worried that his feet were not coming together properly. He was worried how the shot looked. He was well-muscled, handsome and proud in his uniform, but Ben saw immediately that Philip was the poorest athlete among last year's starters. He also saw that none of the other players talked to Philip at all. The whistle blew and Coach Spinks called Ben's group to the center line, where they queued up in 2 lines to wait for their chance to go against the returnees. Spinks called for Pinky and Jim Don to play defense first. The 7 members of the team came together in a circle, joined hands, then broke from the circle, cheering and confident. Pinky and Jim Don slapped hands, and Jim Don glowered at the first 2 boys in the line and sneered, "Come on, rookies." The first 2 boys to face the varsity players were both overcautious, spare-boned, young, and fearful of sudden error and humiliation. The boy on the right side in Ben's line received the ball from Coach Spinks, took one tentative, almost apologetic dribble toward the basket, then stopped and looked for his partner. Pinky was on him as soon as he picked the ball off the floor. Panicked, the boy threw the ball directly into the arms of Jim Don Cooper. The whistle blew. The two boys raced quickly to the back of the line, and the next two boys moved in to challenge Pinky and Jim Don. Through the front door of the gym, Mr. Dacus entered silently, walked to the top of the bleachers, and watched as a tall red-headed boy, painfully clumsy, forced his way all the way under the basket, where he had his shot blocked fiercely by Jim Don as soon as he made it move to shoot. The whistle blew, and it was Ben's turn. He glanced to his left and saw that his partner was the blond boy who had been cut the 2 previous years. Before Spinks threw him the ball, Ben called out to the boy, "My name's Ben. What's yours?" "Lyle," the boy answered shyly. "This ain't no social," the coach barked, hurling the ball at Ben. Ben turned toward Pinky, who was crabbing out to challenge him. The other members of the varsity were screaming, whipping themselves up into a lather now that the season had officially started, and they were strutting their skills before the newcomers. Ben watched Pinky and made no move. "Do something, boy," the coach ordered. Ben began a slow, deliberate dribble to his right. "Get under the basket, Lyle," he shouted to his partner. Lyle raced for the basket in an awkward spring. Jim Don with him every step, slowing him down with a furtive forearm shiver to Lyle's chest. "Come on, boy. We don't have but 5 years to get this practice over, and I didn't tell you to freeze the ball." Ben now had a tremendous area of the court in which to maneuver Pinky. Keeping to the right side of the court, he began to dribble rapidly, faking as if he were going to burst toward the basket, reversing hands, keeping Pinky off balance, then slowing up and bouncing the ball higher, close to Pinky's reach until Pinky made a lunge for the ball, as Ben had waited for him to do, and Ben drove toward the basket and Jim Don. He came with speed and momentum, dazzling speed for a boy encumbered with the ball, and Jim Don moved out heavily, menacingly to stop Ben. Ben left his feet, his eyes affixed to the basket. The ball swung up in 2 hands until Jim Don rose in the air to repel the attack, the 2 bodies of the 2 boys suspended, warring in synchronization. And at the last second, Ben slipped the ball toward Lyle, who waited alone under the basket, slipped the ball under the huge arms of Jim Don, who crashed into Ben. At the same time, Lyle was making a layup with no one around him. The players in the center of the court cheered madly. Lyle almost fell on Ben as he pulled him off the floor and slapped him on the rump, his face astonished and pleased. The varsity brooded and demanded a rematch. The whistle blew. Coach Spinks took a long pull on his RC, then spat a huge portion of it on the cinder block wall. Ben saw Mr. Dacus flash him the V sign in the bleachers. Now, that was a prime example of stinkin' defense. Stinkin', stinkin', stinkin'. That was dog-do defense. Now, let's do that again. Same 4. I want to see some ass-scratching defense this time. "Hey, Coach," Jim Don said. "Let me guard this show-off rookie." "Go ahead." Jim Don pressed close to Ben even before Coach Spinks threw Ben the ball. Come on, rookie. Come on, rookie." Jim Don growled at Ben, his breath smelling like peanut butter and onions. When the ball came, Ben made a violent feint toward the basket, which drove Jim Don stumbling backward. Ben smiled as Jim Don returned, the anger fanning out in his face. Ass down, Spinks said, and Jim Don spread his legs wide, bent his knees, spread his arms, and kept up a fierce whisper. "Come to me, rookie. I want a piece of you, rookie." In a single, fluid motion, Ben bounced the ball between Jim Don's outstretched legs, broke for the basket, retrieved the ball before it bounced a second time, beat Pinky in a foot race to the basket, and laid the ball into the basket left-handed. Going back to the line, Ben slapped Jim Don in the rump and said, "Nice try, Fatsum." "That's Yankee basketball, son. We don't play Yankee basketball down here," Coach Spinks said to Ben. "I want a little less showing off next time you handle the ball. You understand?" "Yes, sir," Ben said at the end of the line. "Hey, Coach, you tell the rookie if he calls me Fatso again, he's going to have some knuckles where his tonsils used to be," Jim Don said. "Shut up, Jim Don, and get your butt down. I'm tired of all this dog-do defense," Spinks said, blowing his whistle. 3 days later, on a Thursday night, the final cuts were made. On a bulletin board outside his office, Coach Spinks posted the names of the players who had made the team. Singly and in pairs, boys who had tried out for the team walked up to check the list for their names. Most of them checked the list quietly, then returned to the locker room to pack their belongings and vanished in the night to be alone with their private desolation. Ben walked to the paper and saw his name, but he felt very little cause for celebration. He had come to like the boys who were trying out much better than he liked the boys on the team. When he returned to the locker room, Philip Turner and Pinky walked up to congratulate him. He thanked them, showered, and dressed. As he left the gymnasium, he noticed a large number of parked cars sitting beneath the streetlights outside the locker room door. Within the cars, the dark shadows of fathers waiting for the verdict on their sons smoked out to meet him as Ben began to walk home. He passed on car I guess it's supposed to say one car, but there's a typo, where a drill instructor from the training base on Biddle Island was holding his crying son in his arms. He heard the man say in a voice that shivered with pain and a stark, inchoate helplessness when faced with his son's naked hurt, "Shoot, Eddie, we won't tell Mama nothing. We'll just tell her you sprained your ankle and had to quit the team. It's okay, Eddie, it's okay. We'll go hunting this weekend, just me and you." Ben went down on one knee to tie his shoe and listen to the boy cry. It was the boy who had missed the layup on the first day of practice. All along the street, in the privacy of lightless automobiles, beneath the gaze of fathers, there was a suffering that would be brief, but one that, at this moment, in this place, was all but unendurable. Ben walked home beside the river, his gym shoes slung over his shoulder, and his thoughts going back to the one team from which he had been cut. He had tried out for the Arlington JCs, a Little League team with a long history of winning teams. He had been cut after the second day of practice and had gone to his room and cried for 3 days. Bull had come up and told him that only girls and babies cried, but this had served only to increase Ben's sense of failure. Not even Lillian could soothe him and make him re-enter family life. He missed 2 days of school until finally Lillian ordered him to school and threatened to spank him if he did not comply with her order. Ben had blamed Bull for his getting cut. "If you hadn't been so cheap and hadn't bought me a decent glove, I'd have made the team." Ben had shouted at his father, expecting a hard slap to the face even as he said it, but a slap never came. Instead, each day after he finished work at the Pentagon, Bull went to the coach of every Little League team in Arlington, Virginia, and asked them if they were short any players. None of them were, but Bull kept looking until he finally came to the practice field below the Fairlington Apartments, where he walked up to the man who had become Ben's first coach, Dave Murphy. The next day, Ben received a phone call from a Coach Murphy who said he heard from some of his players that the Arlington JCs had cut one hell of a baseball player and that he would consider it a personal favor if Ben would come play for his team. That was the beginning, and as Ben walked along the edge of the Salt River, he realized that he wore the memory of Dave Murphy like a chain, and it carried him like a prisoner to the infields of 4 Mile Run Park in Arlington, Virginia, where he played for the Old Dominion Kiwanis for 2 of the best years of his life. In the night games beneath the arc of lights in his last year of Little League, Ben's new spikes gleamed like teeth as he walked toward Dave Murphy. For years, Ben had walked toward him in dreams and sudden thoughts. If he could, Ben would have told him about the soft places a boy reserves for his first coach, his unruined father who enters the grassless practice fields of boyhood like a priest at the end of a life. Coach Murphy was gentle. Yes, that was it, gentle to the clumsy, girl-voiced boys whom he trained to be average, to be adequate, as he hit the soft fungos to the outfield green. But Dave Murphy had a gift. Any boy who came to him had moments of feeling like a king. Any boy who played for the Old Dominion Kiwanis, any boy. Coach Murphy still haunts the old fields where his boys bunted down the line and with graceless fever took infield in voices that cried out for fathers. Going home after practice, they waved goodbye to their coach as they slid their spikes on the sidewalk, astonished at the fire that sprang from their feet. Then they turned toward home, toward the real fathers who waited for their sons to come homeward disguised as heroes. It was in the last game of 1957, with Ben pitching against the Arlington JCs before he left the Little Leagues forever, that Coach Murphy rubbed his pitching shoulder with atomic bomb and whispered for Ben to keep the ball low and throw for the knees. And he whispered, "This one's for you and me, Ben, for you and me." And Ben could remember how on a frog-wired summer night in Virginia he pitched into a sweat as slick as birth, then hit a double in the last inning, driving Runka home with the winning run. The whole team ran to him, picked him up, and pummeled him madly. Then he was lifted and hurled by Coach Murphy toward the infield lights, his spikes silvered with false light, and Ben came down, laughing and jubilant, to Coach Murphy. He came down like a child thrown up by a father. Then Coach Murphy cried out, "Free Cokes," and the Old Dominion Kiwanis sprinted toward the Coke stand. Taking Ben into the trees beyond the park, the coach poured 2 fingers of bourbon into Ben's Coke and said to Ben, "From now on, you call me Dave." Coach Murphy had this gift. He could turn a boy into a king. Ben drank the Coke and he remembered it glowing in his blood like the moon, and very deliberately, Ben looked into the softest of male eyes and said, "That's good Coke, Dave." But we desert the coaches of Little League, Ben thought, leaving the river's edge and returning to the sidewalk beneath the huge water oaks of River Street. We leave them behind and we never think of them again until Ronka, the catcher, or maybe Schmidt, at first asked me if I've heard about Coach Murphy imprisoned in the most terrible room of hospitals, benched by the hardest and most silent of coaches. "Did you hear about his face?" they asked. "It was eaten clean up. They had to cut his nose and half his face off when they probed. All he has left are holes. But he wears a mask now because his mother screamed when she saw him." Old Coach Murphy, 31. The coach of the Old Dominion Kiwanis had come to this hospital, to this strange outfield, to this Old Dominion of cancer, this Old Dominion of death, coaching in the ward of the doomed. Ben went to the hospital and was sent away by nurses who said family only. And Ben had said, "But Dave was my coach." And the nurses had said family only. But they talked to him later, and Dave Murphy's wife talked to him, and they told him how it was in the last days. They said that in the last month, Dave tried to teach the other undermined men to bunt down the line at third and to steal signs from the opposing teams, teaching with fear-stunned eyes behind a gauze mask in the last inarticulate fury of coaching. While the instincts were still good, and before the slow-footed cancer partially stole the brain, as the cancer with its unstealable signs moved toward the eyes behind gauze. At the very end, they roped him screaming to his bed, screaming out for Ronka to take 2, for Schmidt to hold fast to the bag at first, and for Machem to call him Dave. They tied him faceless to his bed, far away from his boys who cried into their pillows, who took down the dusty photos of their coach and prayed for him from the thunderstruck source of their boyhood. At last, the cancer entered his brain, or maybe his soul, and far from bleachers and coke stands, far from shoestring catches and the voices of fathers behind backstops, far from the light of spikes and the sad-blooded moons of 4 Mile Run, he screamed out his death, not like a coach, but a man. What kind of world is it, Ben thought, that lets its coaches die, without his boys around him, buying him cokes, calling him by his first name and rubbing his shoulder with atomic bomb? He died without a face in a room. I never saw, without my kisses in the stained gauze, or without my prayers entering the center of his pain. But worst of all, oh God, you let him die. Let Coach Murphy die. Let Dave die. Without my thanks. As Ben passed Hobie's Grill and the alleyway where Toomer sold his flowers, he wished that all of the fathers of rejected sons would go on a quest as Bull Meacham had once done, comb the fields and gyms looking for a coach who understood a tiny bit the mystery of being a boy. But in Ravenel, there was only Coach Spinks, and he didn't even understand the mystery of the double post offense. He walked until he was ascending the steps of his house. He saw his mother, Marianne, Matthew, and Karen waiting for him in the living room. Entering the house slowly, he put on a sad, mournful expression. He paused to look at them. Then, as if the effort was too much, he began to walk toward the stairs, his head bent in defeat. "What happened, sugar?" Lillian asked, her voice breaking as she prepared herself for the worst. "I heard he was a dreadful coach and a fool of a man," she continued as Ben continued to walk up the stairs. "Do tell us what happened, Ben. We're perishing." "Nothing," Ben said softly, sadly. Then looking up, he said, "Except that I made the team." And he ran to his mother, and his family screamed out their relief.